I love doing it whenever I get a chance, and thank you, Lex, for letting me do it again. The blog is up, too, and there's some great links there at coasttocoastam.com. If you go take a look at that, including a link to this story about the disappearing salmon and one possible suspect for that. It's a great photo of a grizzly bear taken by a friend of mine just last week in Alaska. And back for your questions and comments next for Dr. Bernard Haisch. The book is The God Theory. You can link up to him through the website as well, coasttocoastam.com. This is Ian Punnett. Sherry is in Scottsdale, Arizona on Coast to Coast AM for The God Theory, Dr. Bernard Haisch. Go ahead, Sherry.
Hi, gentlemen. Good evening. It's a pleasure to talk with you, Dr. Haisch. I'm listening to you this evening, and it amazes me that everything you're saying I completely understand. About 5 years ago, I was fortunate enough to run across a gentleman. My entire life, I was raised in a religious society like most of us have been, but I just knew deep within myself someplace that the whole theory they presented in the Bible, Quran, whatever you want to call it, was a complete manipulation. So I absolutely agree with you on that. But I was fortunate enough to, being in a health food store one evening, run across a flyer that was in there, and I called a gentleman. His name is Robert Detzler. Are you familiar with him at all?
No, I'm not.
He may be a man who might be of interest to you, I don't know. But he does what's called spiritual response therapy. And I had no idea what the heck that was at the time. I picked up the flyer, called a couple of months later, and, asked him some basic questions about it. And he said basically it's clearing your past lives and the negativity and so forth. And I thought, oh, yeah, right. Well, he asked me a couple of questions. He did a clearing on me, and I didn't know when he did it or what it involved precisely. But the next day, I felt a definite shift, and apparently it was the next day when he did his actual clearing work. And I have since learned from that time, I completely understand that we are energy, we are spirits. I did not used to believe in reincarnation, and now I completely understand it, because if your spirit is unlimited and, is only here for a temporary period of time, there's no reason. He said, just think outside the box for a moment that you cannot come back and reincarnate. And so, of course, I had many questions from that point on, but somehow I knew he was right. But I spoke to him more over the years and call him on occasion. But he introduced me to a couple of books to read to understand this a little better. And it goes right in tune with what you're saying. And it's so wonderful to hear that you're proving this, scientifically.
Okay. Is there a question? There
is a question. Are you familiar and have you explored the superconscious mind at all?
I don't know exactly what that would mean.
The superconscious mind, in terms of this theory. Now, Sherry, do you want to explain superconscious mind real quickly?
Yes, superconscious mind basically being you have a conscious mind, a subconscious, and then what is called a superconscious that all of us are possessed, which is that transition from our spiritual selves to our physical selves.
Okay.
All right, go ahead. You want to comment on that?
Yeah, well, I guess, I think in many traditions you have this division of our human nature into three. In Huna, for example, my wife talks about Huna. You have a low self, a high self, and a conscious self. And so this notion that we are sort of three-part entities is one that I think you find in many traditions, and it makes sense to me. I wouldn't argue against it, but on the other hand, I don't really know what it means specifically.
Would you agree with Sherry's assessment that the Bible and the Quran and any religious writings are just manipulations?
Well, there's a lot of manipulation there, and a lot of things in the Bible that are absolutely absurd. I mean, for example, there's a quote that of Deuteronomy that was in Sam Harris's book. But I looked it up, and it really is in Deuteronomy. Let me give you this quote. If a man discovers on his wedding night that his bride is not a virgin, he must stone her to death on her father's doorstep. Now, did God say that, I mean, if any kind of God said that, you can count me out as a believer in that God. I mean, I myself would be an atheist toward that kind of God. That's in the Bible. So there certainly are things in the Bible that are objectionable, and there are other things that are probably foolish, and there probably are some truths in there too. But in terms of being an infallible word of God, I don't believe that.
Yeah, I certainly would agree on that. Would you ever consider that something like that is a snapshot of a time when people of faith were banding together in a community, and as absurd as that may seem to us now, that was a necessity for them to stay together and survive?
Well, that could be, but unfortunately, that same kind of stuff is still taking place today in the Middle East. It's not over with.
Derek is in Mississippi on Coast to Coast AM. Derek?
Speak with you, English. Speak with you, Doctor. I was wondering where divine intervention comes into play in your God theory.
Is there ever divine intervention?
Well, in a sense, I think there is indirectly, because I think that we share our consciousness with God, and we are therefore creative beings. And so I think that together with God, we exercise our own creativity to try to make things happen. I think we can, to some extent, direct what happens in our lives through our own creative potential. And in a sense, we do that together with God because we share it, but it's really done on our side more, I think. But again, I'm just talking off the top of my head because I don't know this for certain at all, and I certainly haven't proven anything.
Gary is in San Diego on a Wildcard line on Coast to Coast AM for Dr. Bernard Haisch. Gary?
Yes, this is Gary. My question is, if extraterrestrial disclosure came, would it revolutionize and liberate our civilizations, or would we still be a government-controlled and taxed society? And I'll take my question off the air.
Interesting. What do you think?
I don't have a clue. I mean, if they show up, if they land on the mall in Washington, will they be good or bad aliens? I don't know. I simply don't know the answer to that.
But knowing human nature, how do you think we would react to that? How would scientists react to that?
Well, this is interesting because as long as we are able to detect an alien civilization with a radio telescope, and they're nicely far away, so there's no chance of us getting together anytime soon, and it's all done using scientific techniques, that's okay. That's what scientists talk about when they have a few beers and they want to speculate about, what great things could happen under those circumstances. But for the aliens to come here and show up and, wind up in some position of superiority to us, I don't think that would go over very well at all with scientists.
Wouldn't that just be a crushing blow to their egos?
It wouldn't help the egos one bit. Yeah, crushing blow is perhaps a good way to put it.
That's probably what but it's interesting to me that scientists, it would be like zoologists studying tigers from a distance and then actually but being afraid of ever getting close to them. And yet that's what they're studying, so they study them from very, very far away when actually what they need to do is encounter them. And if they encountered them, it would change everything about their science.
Imagine the difference between us and a civilization that's a million years advanced. It's sort of like imagine an ant scurrying across my computer screen and trying to figure out what my screensaver is doing.
Right.
It's just not going to happen.
Bruce is in Monterey, California on Coast to Coast AM for Dr. Bernard Haisch. Bruce?
Yes, sir. Gentlemen, this is a opinion, and I'll get a comment from you, too. I have always believed that science and religion prove each other. And my main example is this. In the late 1800s, the French doctor measured the weight loss of a human versus a animal at the death. The human lost between 12 to 14 pounds over 3 days. Animal, nothing. In the Bible, it states the soul of the animal is in God's hand. Now, Einstein's theory states that anything of mass or whatever would have weight, thus our loss of 12 to 14 pounds would be our soul. And probably in time, this is how scientists would finally decipher the difference between animal and human, being the fact that we would have the soul versus the animal.
It's an interesting way of looking at that. That if we're measuring